Ah, sit down, young'uns, and let me tell you a tale of long ago, a tale of fire and fury, of mighty horsemen and vast empires. We're talking about the time when the Mongols, fierce and relentless, swept across the steppes and forests to conquer the lands we now call Russia. It's a story of courage and conquest, of terror and tenacity, and it all began many moons ago in the early 13th century. Now, the Mongols were a nomadic people, masters of horseback and bow, led by a man of legend, Genghis Khan. Born as Temujin in the harsh steppes of Mongolia, he united the fractious tribes under his iron fist and forged them into a fearsome war machine. By the time he became Genghis Khan, or universal ruler, around 1206, he had his sights set beyond the steppes, eyeing the rich lands to the west. In 1223, Genghis sent his trusted generals Subutai and Jebe on a reconnaissance mission into the far west, a foray that led them to the fringes of the Russian principalities. Now, Russia back then wasn't the unified country we know today. It was a patchwork of principalities, Kiev, Novgorod, Vladimir, and many others, each ruled by its own prince, often bickering and feuding among themselves. The first real encounter between the Mongols and the Russians happened at the Battle of the Kalka River. The Russian princes, thinking themselves quite the warriors, marched out to meet the Mongols, but they didn't know what they were up against. Subutai and Jebe, with their lightning-fast cavalry and cunning tactics, crushed the Russian forces, leaving a trail of devastation. They didn't stick around long, though, just a taste of what was to come. Fast forward a bit to the 1230s. Genghis Khan had passed away, but his grandsons, especially Batu Khan, were carrying on his legacy of conquest. Batu, with his general Subutai again at his side, was tasked with expanding the empire into Europe, and that meant Russia was right in their path. In 1237, Batu Khan launched the full-scale invasion of Russia. The Mongols came like a storm in the night, swift and merciless. First, they hit the city of Ryazan. The city walls were strong, but the Mongols were stronger. After a brutal siege, Ryazan fell, its people slaughtered or taken as slaves. Stories say that the destruction was so complete, not a soul was left to bury the dead. Next in line was Moscow, then a small but growing town. The same fate met them: siege, fire, and blood. Vladimir Suzdal, one of the more significant principalities, was hit in 1238. The Grand Prince Yuri tried to muster a defense, but it was like trying to stop the tide with a broom. The city fell, the Grand Cathedral burned, and Yuri fled, only to be cut down later. The Mongols moved with a ferocity and speed that left the Russians reeling. They didn't just attack, they encircled cities, cut off supplies, and used psychological warfare. They'd send messengers ahead demanding surrender, and those who resisted faced annihilation. Those who submitted were spared, but under harsh tribute. By 1240, Kiev, the mother of Russian cities, was in the crosshairs. Kiev had seen many invaders, but none like the Mongols. Batu Khan's forces laid siege to the city, and after several weeks they breached the walls. Kiev was razed, its churches burned, its treasures plundered. It was said that the Dnieper River ran red with blood. After Kiev, the Mongols didn't stop. They pushed further west into Europe, leaving a chain of devastated principalities in their wake. They brought with them the yoke of Mongol rule, known as the Mongol yoke, which would weigh heavily on the Russian lands for over 2 centuries. Now, life under the Mongol yoke wasn't all fire and brimstone. The Mongols were brutal conquerors, but they were also pragmatic rulers. They allowed the local princes to stay in power as long as they paid tribute and didn't cause trouble. This system of vassalage meant that Russian lands were subjugated but not directly administered by the Mongols. The Golden Horde, as Batu Khan's realm was called, ruled from the steppe, extracting wealth and soldiers from the Russian principalities. Despite the heavy hand of the Mongols, some cities like Novgorod managed to maintain a degree of autonomy, largely because they wisely chose to submit early and pay the hefty tributes. They became vital trade centers under the Mongol Pax Mongolica, which kept the trade routes open and relatively safe across the vast expanse of the Mongol Empire. The Mongol invasion left an indelible mark on Russia. The constant threat of raids and the heavy tributes stunted economic and cultural growth for generations. Yet, the Mongols also inadvertently unified the Russian people through shared suffering and resistance. Over time, new powers rose, most notably the Grand Duchy of Moscow, which began to rally the disparate Russian lands against their common oppressor. By the late 14th century, the tide was turning. The Russians began to shake off the Mongol yoke, led by figures like Dmitry Donskoy, who scored a significant victory at the Battle of Kulikovo in 1380. Though this didn't end Mongol dominance immediately, it was a symbol of growing Russian strength and unity. Finally, in 1480, Grand Prince Ivan III of Moscow, known as Ivan the Great, refused to pay the annual tribute to the Mongols. This led to a standoff known as the Great Stand on the Ugra River, where the Mongols, weakened and divided, eventually withdrew without a fight. This marked the end of Mongol rule over Russia. And so, young'uns, that's how the Mongols came to conquer and then were pushed out of Russia. It was a tale of relentless conquest, brutal subjugation, and eventual resilience and liberation. The Mongols left a legacy of both destruction and unification, shaping the course of Russian history in ways that echo down to this very day.